Versus Homegrown IXPs session from the AFPIF virtual peering series. I'd like to introduce you to Hisham Ibrahim, my co-moderator. I am from the RIPE NCC and I'm Fearghas McKay from Flexoptix. We hope we've got an interesting session for you today and we would like to get going. The object of this session is to look at building new IXPs in alternative locations in the country, rather than just building into the primary city. And we hope that our panelists today will be able to give you a good insight into the possibilities. Next slide, please. Our session is focused around 3 questions. When does it make sense to open up another IXP in a different city of the country? Should the same model and mindset be followed as the one in the capital? Are the roles of these IXPs exactly the same? And if not, what is the measure of success for these IXPs? Next slide, please. So today, Hisham and myself will be moderating. We have Nurani Nimpuno from LINX, who will be opening the panelists. Then Patrick Gilmore, who you may know from Akamai, but currently is North Carolina IX. Julio Sirota, who is the infrastructure manager for IX Brazil, which is a large distributed IX across the whole country. Unfortunately, Tashi Phuntsho has had to cancel at the last minute due to a family crisis, so will not be joining us. And we'll be closing our panelists with Jolley from Durban, who is one of the original drivers behind the IX and is an ongoing volunteer. We'll then go into a Q&A session run by Hisham, and then virtual peerings with Mishuki, and then on to a social. We have some housekeeping rules. We're recording the session, so you can watch it later and other people will be able to see it. We ask that you are respectful and act responsibly to the other participants in the session. If asking questions or speaking, please try and keep it short and straight to the point and very simple. We don't really like grandstanding very much. Please give your first name and country, like Emily, Ethiopia, Jacinta, Uganda, Theo, Mali, etc. If appropriate, you can also give your affiliation if you feel that's important. ISOC has a standard code of conduct, which you can see at the link below. And you are again requested to follow that. Next slide, please. We have a chat room where you can chat with the other attendees during the session. We do ask, though, that you use the Q&A room to post your questions. This enables us to provide easier access to the questions, and we don't miss any to the panelists. And we have people going through the Q&A room who will pick up the questions and tag them as required. Either they'll be answered live or in the Q&A. If you want to reach people externally, our tags are IPeer in Africa, virtual peering, and IXP, social media. We have simultaneous interpretation running from English to French and French to English. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be an interpretation link with a globe above it. Click on that and you can choose the language options you're looking for. And we'll have live captioning available, unfortunately only in English at this point. Next slide, please. So none of this would be possible without our sponsors. Simultaneous interpretation is done by Flexoptix. So thank you to everyone else at Flexoptix. Our series sponsors are Facebook, which is Ben and Andrew and Ben from Facebook, Michelle, Carla and Andrew from NAP Africa, Fatva from PAX, and Brett and Rusi from Microsoft. Can we run our first poll at this point, please, Joanna? We're going to run this poll twice, once just now, and if you can answer that, we will have a look at the results in a moment or two. The event sponsor is Rack Center and Ijike, Obafemi, and Ayotunde. We thank you again for your support. And do we have the results yet from the poll? Do we have enough people?
People are still answering. We're now at 20 out of 53. So if I stop it, people won't be able to vote anymore. I will give it 5 seconds and then I can stop it to show the results.
So 58% of the respondents, 18 out of 31, do have an alternate location IXP. 6% no, but we're considering, and 10% no, there are no likely plans, and I don't know is about a quarter. So let's move on to our first speaker, Nurani Nimpuno. And Nurani, can I ask you to introduce yourself and give us your overview on alternate locations, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much, Fearghas. It's my pleasure to be here today. I'm Nurani, and I'm the head of global engagement at the London Internet Exchange. But I've been working with IXPs for at least the last decade. So I'm going to try to address these 3 questions. And in fact, I think all these 3 questions can be answered by looking at, first of all, what the purpose of an IXP is. So if we're looking at when does it make sense to open up another IXP? Should they follow the same model, and are the roles of the IXP the same? So I think when looking at if it makes sense to open up an IXP, you really need to go back to what the purpose of an IXP is. And the purpose of IXPs are really to improve local interconnection. So if you think you can improve the local interconnection by opening up the first or the second or the third IXP, then I think that's worth pursuing. And then also when starting IXPs, there are a few things you need to think about. And I think the key of success to any IXP is that it needs to be sustainable and it needs to bring value to its participants. So again, if you can do those things, you have a good recipe for an IXP. So what does that mean? Well, sustainable means that it needs to be financially sustainable. It needs to be able to afford its operations and the hardware and things like that. But I think sometimes when you look at the cost of an IXP, it's very easy and tangible to look at the hardware, but you forget about the other costs of the IXPs. So you need to have a stable management and staff and resources at the IXP. It needs to be financially sustainable. You don't want to start an IXP that then runs out of money in the first year or 2. You need to have a good long-term strategy. That means that you need to make sure that that IXP is scalable. And then, so looking at the second part about bringing value to the participants, what does that mean? Well, it really means that the IXP is there to serve the participants. No matter what model you're using, the IXP is there to serve its participants. So that means that first of all, you need to have enough participants, obviously, for it to make sense. If you have 2 participants, you might as well just pull a cable between those 2 networks and you're done. You need to also have a mix of participants. There's no point having an IXP that only has international CDNs at it, for example, or only has local access providers. The idea of an IXP is to facilitate that interconnection. So you want to have a diverse set of networks, AS numbers on it. And then it needs to bring some benefit to it. And I think the benefit is one that you can, it's a host of things, really. It's not just one thing. So obviously reduced costs is one thing that you'd really want to try to achieve by having an IXP. Better interconnection, lower latency, better speed. unique routes, more diverse interconnection. All those things are benefits that you get from an IXP. And if you can achieve that by having an IXP there, I think the IXP is serving its purpose. So when looking at whether it's the very first IXP in a region or a country or another IXP, it needs to serve it needs to achieve those benefits. So for example, in a previous life, I worked for NetNode in Sweden, and the main IXP there was in Stockholm, or is in Stockholm, but we also had regional IXPs, in the whole of the country, because we wanted to be able to serve those networks locally. And Sweden is a very long country, so you didn't want everything to go through Stockholm. In a life after that, I worked for Asteroid, and we started up new IXPs. So we were looking at where are there gaps in the market, so to speak. Where can we see that there's a need for a well-functioning, stable, sustainable IXP? And those are the things that we looked at then. And then for LINX, where I'm working now, we are mostly serving the UK, but we were approached a few years ago to start an IXP in the US, so we did so. And we also work in partnerships with local partners to build IXPs where it makes sense. So I think answering all of those questions, that comes back to those things. What's the purpose of the IXP? Can you bring value to the participants? Can you improve local interconnection? And do you have a sustainable model? If you have that, then you've got a good recipe. And whether that is, I think it's often easy to think of an IXP, the measurement of success being the amount of traffic at the IXP or the amount of participants. But I actually think that's a bit of a false premise, because again, going back to local interconnection, it's about how do you serve those participants? And in some locations, even if it's only a dozen or 20 networks connected, if they get those benefits that are listed out of the IXP, and you still have a sustainable IXP, and it's still financially sustainable, then I think that's, that's great. Then it's achieved what the IXP is supposed to do. So I'm happy to dig a little bit further into those things as we continue the discussion. But I think those are the very first questions you need to ask yourself when looking to build the first or the second or third or fourth or fifth or 20th IXP in a region.
Thank you for that, Nurani. And next up is Patrick Gilmore, who's just joined us. Patrick, would you like to go live? Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Gilmore. I founded something called the North Carolina Internet Exchange, and I think I had a couple of slides. But I will just talk about what we can do for smaller IXPs. So the North Carolina Internet Exchange, not to tout it because I don't know how many people are going to go to Charlotte, North Carolina, is a tiny IXP in the United States along the East Coast. We started it because, there's the slides. We started it because, like some of the things Nurani said, we honestly believe that wherever there is traffic to trade, wherever local people can get a benefit is a good place for an IXP. It doesn't have to be large, it doesn't have to be, hundreds of millions of people, and it doesn't have to be terabits of traffic. So the thing that I wanted to point out is that this is true even if the large IXPs are close to where you happen to be. So taking this as an example, the North Carolina Internet Exchange is actually really close to the largest traffic exchange in the United States. It's just a couple of milliseconds. I'm going to get a couple of maps on the slides in a second. Oh, thank you. There it was. So here's Atlanta. It's 245 miles. I just used the car because it was easier than trying to get out fiber maps because different people have different maps. But the fiber follows the car route pretty closely. Putting that into real numbers, it's about 394 kilometers or 4 milliseconds. That's how far it is to a large IXP. Now there's some fiber routing that could change that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Ashburn is even larger than Atlanta. and it's 6 milliseconds away. But either of these are enormous peering cities for the United States. Yet Charlotte is still a good place for people to peer, both because it's local. So if you've got a small exchange or business, sorry, not exchange, you've got a small ISP or business or a hosting provider somewhere in there, then it's nice for them to be able to trade traffic without going all that distance. There's the economic advantage. We found that even for the large providers, taking, for example, large cable companies or nationwide DSL companies here in the US, just the cost of the fiber getting back and forth to these larger cities makes it economically viable. So now you've got a performance reason and you've got a business reason, both of which are, either one of which is useful for the IXP, and now we have both. And this is even in a city where the population is not very large. We're not talking about tens of millions of people here. So you can get buy-in from both the small players and the big players if you have a local internet exchange and you get a lot of buy-in from the local groups around it. We honestly believe that there's room for dozens, hundreds of these across the world, so that you shouldn't have to look at just what we call in the US, the NFL cities, where they have major sports teams, or around the world where there's an international airport. You can actually do this in much, much smaller cities, and we think it's useful to the local economy, it's useful to the local network, and it's even useful to the large players that are national or international.
Thank you, Patrick. And moving on now to Julio from Brazil. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and give us the background.
Thanks for the invitation. My name is Julio Sirota. I am the infrastructure manager of IX.br. And first, I'd like to give you a big picture of how our internet exchange were developed inside the Brazilian internet governance, because I believe we have a different model. And well, so internet started in Brazil in 1988, 1989. And in the beginning, the cost of the global interconnection was too expensive. The bandwidth was so small. So the existence of points of interconnection was a need to make internet work, because otherwise it won't be possible. So we have initially a few academic initiatives, and in 2004, IX.br assumed the take care of this first internet exchange developed in a few universities in Brazil, and it started a new project called initially PTT Metro, and now it's called IX.br. What is the difference that IX.br, it's an executive arm of an internet steering committee that exists in Brazil. And one of the jobs of IX.br is take care of the .br domain registration. And we charge annual fee for the maintenance of the DNS services and the .br working for all Brazilian users. And with the money we get from this domain registration, we could develop another project other than the DNS. So IX.br started several initiatives with the goal to develop internet in Brazil. And one of these projects was IX.br. So you can say that, okay, we don't have the need to be sustainable in terms of financial of the operation of the IX, because we have the support from IX.br. It's important to understand that IX.br invest in CapEx, only in equipment, not in services. So it's not allowed for IX.br to invest in OpEx in the operation of IX.br. So we established several partnerships with data centers, telecom companies, operators, government institutions to host our equipments. And with this partnership, we started to develop IXPs in several cities in Brazil. Nowadays, we have 33 internet exchanges. They are not interconnected because we believe that the telecom companies are responsible for the interconnection between different areas of the country. Of course, we have IXPs from the biggest one in the world, that is São Paulo, with more than 2,200 participants connected, and to very small that started 1 year ago with 15 or 20 participants. So it's really interesting to see how the new IXPs will behave in terms of development, because it really depends on the benefits that the participants will get from that. But we really push all networks in the metropolitan area to connect to the local internet exchange point. Another thing that it's important to note in Brazil is the amount of internet service providers that we have developing their business in Brazil. We have between 12,000 to 20,000 ISPs working. This number is really difficult to give you a precise number because it's hard to measure it. Some of them are informal, some are not registered in the national regulator. But what's important is that we have a lot of networks in Brazil. We have almost 9,000 autonomous systems assigned to these companies. And these are our clients. These are the guys that are selling internet to the end users and looking for content and looking for a better interconnection. So this is the balance that we have to establish between have a good operation status for these ISPs and be connected to a local internet exchange point. Sometimes it doesn't make sense for them to connect to a local or small internet exchange point. So I think later we can discuss which benefits we can get with the interconnection to the small ISPs.
Thank you, Julio. A very different scale from the other IXPs. Can I now ask Donald to join us and introduce himself and discuss Durban IX?
Thanks, Fearghas. Yeah, so my name is Donald Jolley, and I'm a volunteer at the Durban Internet Exchange Point. For those that don't know, Durban's a city on the east coast of South Africa. We actually have 2 IXPs that you can connect to in Durban. NAP Africa is run by the Terraco data centers that started in, I think, late 2011. Andrew can probably correct me on that. And when their data center opened. NAP Africa's business model or their model is fairly straightforward. Terraco has built the internet exchange point to connect their customers within the co-location facility. And that's fully managed by Terraco. DINX launched in 2012, is a community-run exchange point. And in 2016, the Durban Internet Exchange became the first exchange in South Africa to become a multi-site exchange point, opening up in 2 data centers and connecting them together within the metro. I think most of the points that we've been talking about, the questions have been answered. But I just want to make a couple of points on my side with the the involvement that I've had. Building an exchange point's really simple. You just need a rack, rack space, power, a switch, and a server to spin up some software on. So the technology is the easy part. I think the hard part is dealing with the people and getting the organizations, the internet service providers, the content providers, all to connect to the exchange and make people aware that the exchange is there. And so, I think, when does it make sense to open up an internet exchange point in a different city in the same country? I think an example here is for Durban. When we first started, we didn't have very many networks connected to the exchange point, and it wasn't successful is the wrong word. It just it took time and effort to carry on building the exchange point. And I know that everybody that participates in the back end with exchange points, like with NAP, with DINX, all over the world, there's lots of effort that's going on in the background to encourage people and teach people about exchange points. I don't think we need to go on about what the values are. I think we know what the values are. But Durban, similar to what Patrick was saying, we have a scenario where we are around about 600 kilometers. I'm not sure what that is in miles, but about a 6-hour drive to Johannesburg. And, for most people, they were just buying long distance, expensive links to connect to the exchange point. And as the amount of traffic that they needed and to get to the different networks increased, so it became more successful, or a better idea to connect to a local exchange point. And I think it was Julio mentioned that their exchange point is different to LINX, and it's different to the models that we have in this country and on the African continent. And so I don't think any exchange point is a copy and paste of any other one. And so I think we just have to be aware that not one size fits all. And I think, the last thing that I want to put forward about internet exchange points is that it grows a community. And with the community, the network operator groups form, and there's skills transfer that happens with the NOGs, and so it creates a great ecosystem for the internet in general. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Don. And now I'd like to do a quick run through the panelists to give you all a chance to comment on what the other people had to say. So straight back to you, Nurani. Thanks.
Okay, I can certainly do that. Thanks. So yeah, a few things I'd like to pick up on. I think so also what Donald was saying about the hardware is the simple part, and I think IXPs are often started by techies, and techies love gear, so it's often easy to just focus on the hardware and say, okay, can we get the hardware and the rest will follow. I think the other thing is that it's also, because the hardware is the physical part, it's also easy to focus on that, because you think once you have that in place, everything else will follow. But of course, like he said, that's the simple part. The hardware is the simple part. And that's also where I think we've all seen many examples of IXPs being started up by donated hardware, and they think, you know, we're ready to go, and off you go. And then there's not a plan to grow that IXP. And building the community around the IXP is really key to any IXP. And I think, you know, in this and in previous sessions, we've talked about different IXP models, but I actually think the model is the least interesting part of the IXP, whether you have a commercial IXP, a membership run IXP, community IXP, a profit, non-profit, as long as you meet your main objective of bringing value to the participants of the IXP. I think you can do that as a commercial IXP, as membership IXP, as a community run IXP, but that's really where your focus should be. And I think, you know, there are often these talks about like, this is a local IXP and this is a regional IXP, but no IXP starts out as a regional IXP. There's no point going in saying this is going to be a regional IXP. We'll put in lots of hardware to support lots and lots of 100 gig ports and you know, build it and they will come, because that's not how IXPs grow. So you have to start somewhere. So I say, if you're going to start an IXP, start small and let it grow, and focus on building the community around the IXP. And the reason you need to have this community around the IXP is because an IXP really gathers a host of competitors. And this is the wonderful thing about the internet, right? That we are all both cooperating and competing with each other. And at the IXP, you bring together all those competitors, as well as those networks that are friendly, so to speak. And in order to get them to see that there's mutual benefit of being at the IXP, you need to build that community and build that trust. And I think in new markets, in new locations, that's often one of the biggest challenges, because ISPs or local operators might not be willing to give something away for free that could benefit their competitor, even if they realize that it will benefit themselves as well. And then I wanted to touch upon some of the other benefits of an IXP that I think actually all other panelists sort of touched upon. And I think that's actually worth discussing a little bit, that obviously the main point of an IXP is to improve the local interconnection, bring value to the participants, and to continue to be sustainable and grow. But if you do it right, an IXP can actually be a catalyst for change and achieve a lot of other things. Not just benefits like the ones I mentioned at the start to the participants, lower cost of interconnection, lower latency, content closer to the user, better interconnection speeds, etc. But so, for example, if you look at Europe, where a lot of the IXPs started out very early on, it has also led to a flourishing data center market. It has led to more competition in the ISP space. It's led to lower costs of interconnection, both local interconnection and transit costs. And that then translates to lower cost to the end user. But then also on a countrywide level, it also, a good IXP can lead to better resilience within that country, having more of the local or the national AS numbers exchange that traffic within the country, rather than having it leave the country or the continent or the region and traverse the internet far away before it comes back again. So those other things are actually, we can see that some of the mature IXPs in the world, they've also brought about those benefits. And that's not something that automatically happens if you just put an IXP in place, but it's something that happens if you do it right, and if you focus on developing the IXP and listening to your community.
Thank you for that, Nurani. Patrick, do you give any follow-up comments?
Well, I would like to just repeat everything Nurani said, but that would be silly. She's obviously got some amazingly good points. So I'm going to make some less important, but still, I think, useful points. Going back to the equipment, completely agree with what Nurani said. You know, that's not the most important part, but you know, you do need equipment, and a lot of people concentrate on things like I need to have dual soups, I need to have dual power supplies, I need to have generator backup, I need to have all these things. Depends upon where you are and who your participants are and what your goal is. If this is you know, a community project where a bunch of ISPs, content providers, whatever, are getting together to just save some money or save some milliseconds, start with a pizza box, 1 PS switch, just get it going. The hard part is the first step. The hard part is getting people to actually set up those BGP sessions, plug in those Ethernet cables, run that fiber. That's the hard part. Once you get it going, then you can worry about the rest. This is obviously for, you know, the homegrown style ISPs. We're not talking about like an Equinix style IXP with a large business model behind it. That is actually one of the questions in the Q&A. What is the business model behind starting an IXP? It's up to you. I'm on the board of the Seattle Internet Exchange, which started literally as 3 guys going, hey, let's throw a fiber, and this is not an exaggeration, let's throw a fiber over this wall. I have an old switch, or actually I think it was a hub, lying around, let's plug it in and away we go. If that's your business model, that's great. If you need something else to pay for rack power and stuff like that, then, you know, charge something. Most IXPs are not for profit, and even the for-profit ones are really there to, let's say, bolster another business like colo, because it helps bring people into the colo and stuff like that. But it's really up to you, whatever business model works best for you to get the IXP running. So get something going, whether it's, you know, low end or high end, whether it's free, volunteer, or if there's an actual business behind it. But I would, and you know, you do you, make sure your internet exchange is under your plan. But I would discourage people looking at this like a large profit center. It could be an adjunct to an existing profit center, like a fiber provider or a co-location space. But internet exchanges that start with the idea of charging very large amounts and, you know, trying to make a lot of money out of it are unlikely to do all those things that Nurani said. It's not going to generate or create a community around it. It's going to make it easy for somebody to swoop in with a free or cheap IXP and undercut you and things like that. So your business model is your business model, but I would suggest start slow, start small, get it off the ground, and then worry about the rest later. And that's, I think that's most of the comments that I had that Nurani didn't already cover, because she, you know, is very good and got everything that she should have.
Thank you, Patrick. Julio, would you like to comment again?
Yeah, I think the most difficult part of running or establishing an IXP are the people, because there are people behind all the networks that connect to the IXP, and they have their own needs, their own ideas. So sometimes you have to educate these people in terms of what is internet, what is how internet works, what is the benefits of an internet exchange point, and not only change their view to only look for the economic part of the interconnection to the IXP. And what we always say to the guys that are close to our small IXPs, is that for us the most important indicator for the growing of the IXP is the number of networks connected. So if you have an increased number or a number of networks that are present in has presence in a single point, this took the attention of the CDNs and other companies that that start to look to the city or this point as with another view. For example, maybe a CDN start, okay, there's a sufficient number of networks connected there that we will invest there. Or some telecom companies that will sell transport or sell IP transit to these networks. Okay, I will build my infrastructure to reach that point. It will be interesting for us. So independently, in terms of the amount of traffic that the network will get in the short time, the investment in the connection and make this point attractive, I think it's very important. So this is one thing that we try to push the networks in Brazil to interconnect to the small and local internet exchange points.
Thank you, Julio. And Don.
Yeah, so as Patrick and Nurani pretty much summed up everything, so maybe I should just move it on. Except I do want to really add one point that I think people that want to start operating internet exchange point, especially if it's going to be a homegrown solution, if I can call it that, you know, being built from within the town or city, is that there's support from the international community on all different levels. You know, if it comes to needing hardware, I'm sure getting hardware would be really easy to start off with. All the software to run exchange points is very mature. The things like the root server software is open source, easily available. So I think you're not alone. You know, when you join the exchange point community, you are joining people that have traveled the rocky road, you know, many times over. So I think it is important for people to realize that. And then just on the point of the number of ASNs, it's interesting to see that, and maybe I'm opening up a can of worms here, but where there's bad regulation, there are not a large number of ASNs or networks because they haven't been given there's not a framework for them to build, you know, maybe they're not even allowed to build a network. Connecting to the internet exchange point, you know, they don't want to connect to an internet exchange point because the regulation says, well, when you have to connect to the internet exchange point and you have to peer with everybody. And those are the sorts of things that are going to basically, you know, that don't work well for internet exchange points. And I think just something to be aware of. And then, but I think also the growth of local internet exchange points will become greater as we go on, because the access links into networks are becoming faster and faster. So, you know, you have 100 megabit links, gigabit links, 10 gigabit links going into the access layer of networks, and they will slowly over time need to serve more content, and that content will have to come from closer to the users.
Thank you, Don. Now I'll hand over to Hisham, who's going to drive the Q&A session. Thank you all for your contributions.
Yeah, thanks, Fearghas, for that. And thank you all for the lovely interventions that you had. You've actually covered the topic quite nicely, but I still have a few questions, and hopefully we can get a discussion going. And for the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will go with them. I actually have a few of them in mind. I'll start first with, there was a lot of discussion about like different ISPs and number of ISPs in the country and number of players. I wanted to pick your mind a bit about like, the non-traditional ISPs joining as members, right? And we're seeing a large number of like fintech organizations. We're seeing a lot of like enterprise that are moving towards getting their resources and their own ASN and being a little bit more in control of their traffic, you know, independent network operators. Are there thoughts on that, and do they play in a factor in choosing where you want to build an exchange or not? And it's a free-for-all. Anybody with thoughts?
I'm going to go first just because I think that this is I happen to think this is near and dear to my heart. I'm excited about the non-traditional ISPs getting in. You know, credit card companies, financial companies, you know, grocery stores. I don't really care who it is. The internet is by definition a network of networks, and the old model of backbone networks to local networks to end users was fine in the 1980s and 90s, but is not fine today. So I think that if you have, and this is honestly something that we thought about consciously when we started up in Charlotte, if you have some companies that are local that can connect to it, that is a great thing, and that helps build the community, and that helps build traffic, and that helps build demand, which, you know, has a nice virtuous circle, as we call it, making things bigger. But a couple of things. First of all, be a little careful, because enterprises sometimes come to your internet exchange and think that they can reach the internet from it, and then you have an education problem. So that causes, you know, that's a dangerous thing, because if you, the worst thing in business, the worst thing in starting a new project is missed expectations. And if their expectations are wrong, even if it had nothing to do with you, could cause bad reputation for you, even though, you know, clearly not your fault. Secondly, they may think it's a good thing and then pull back later when they realize they didn't get as much benefit. So those are two things that you really have to watch out for. So I wouldn't count them as, like, I have 4 enterprises and 1 ISP. That's probably not a good starting point. You probably need about 3 ISPs. And then you'll get content providers and things also coming along. But I think it's great. And then one last minor comment on it. I have, and other people have talked about, you know, growing and getting more people in, and creating a larger community, starting small and going regional and national, things like that. I think it's also perfectly fine if you start up and you have 3 ISPs and get a couple CDNs, and then some enterprises join, and then it sits just like that for years. There's nothing wrong with that. Just let it go. If it grows, that's a great thing. But if it doesn't grow, you've still done a great job getting local interconnectivity improved.
Yeah, and I like that, and it also supports the notion that Nurani mentioned at the beginning, which is the purpose, right? Why are you building the exchange? And if it serves a purpose, then growing it to be as big as, you know, the Brazilian exchange isn't necessarily a target that you had, as long as it does what you wanted it to do. Others with thought on enterprise and non-traditional members?
I'm happy to jump in.
Please, Nurani.
We definitely see this, particularly in London at LINX. We see, not that there's a shift, but we see new players coming onto the market. But I think this is, you know, a fairly logical step, and one that we should celebrate, because it means that more organizations and companies are becoming aware of the fact that internet is part of their infrastructure. And I think that's really how you have to see it. And I think, you know, in many places we've actually seen it as a consequence of the pandemic, because a lot of organizations have had to, if they didn't do it before, it's kind of forced this digital transformation of their organizations, where they have to move a lot of things to online platforms instead of having them in-house. So I think this is a really positive step, and we see this in at LINX as you know, something that's happened quite a lot over the last year or two. I mean, longer than that, but there's been an acceleration of that. And I think, you know, from LINX's perspective, again, it comes back to that purpose, you know, can we serve them? And I think, you know, in that sense, it's a simple, you know, we like to pretend it's very advanced, but IXPs are quite simple, but it comes back to having to, you know, make sure you serve the purpose that you've set out. The difference is possibly with enterprise and fintech that they are not, they have not spent a decade in our little corner of the industry. So we find that we need to explain a lot more to them of how peering works and you know, the benefits of the exchange point, and also what Patrick was saying, you know, that what an IXP is and what it isn't. But I'm also quite surprised by how switched on a lot of these organizations are. They have, some of them have already, they're sort of at the end of their digital transformation, and they understand the need to control not just what's within sort of the borders of the walls of your office, but actually your whole internet interconnectivity. And I think, you know, it's, again, we think that diversity is fantastic. You know, we want to serve those, you know, the fintechs and enterprises, but they bring value to the existing participants at the IXP as well. So, you know, it's not like it cannibalizes on any of the existing customers of the IXP. It actually enriches it. And I think that is, you know, a positive for the IXP, but also for anyone who's at the IXP.
Yeah, thank you for that. That really makes sense. Donald, yeah?
Yeah, and again, I think everyone's said it, and I'm just going to just write down the point even before Nurani said it, is that the education and skills that are required for the enterprises as they connect to the exchange, we see the same thing happening in South Africa, where enterprises are getting their own ASNs. And I think it is important that exchange points do have a very specific guidelines on what you have to have in order to join the exchange point, which is relatively low. It's, you know, an AS number and an IP space. But, you know, we're seeing these enterprises come, however, they have never heard of BGP before. So if there is a good network operator group community, generally speaking, there's people that they can reach out to, or they know people within that community. So again, it builds this circle and this ecosystem where as these enterprises connect, so they just another network operator of sorts. Yes, I might be shamed for saying that, but they do operate a type of network as an enterprise. And so, yeah, I guess we should be welcoming them to the exchange point family.
Patrick, I saw you unmuted yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's be fair. There's plenty of ISPs that also screw up connecting to an internet exchange. It's not just enterprises, but I'm just saying, let's not shame all the enterprises. Some of them have smart people there.
No, but I mean, it's a fair point, and maybe Don, again, you guys built a NOG around the exchange, or exchange around the NOG, and you invested a lot in the local community there. And are you seeing that paying off? I mean, there's everybody I think mentioned so far the educational part of it, whether it's ISPs, whether it's enterprise, whether it's non-traditional. Do you see that's paying out on the long run for you guys?
I think it's really difficult to tell, because what would it look like if it didn't happen? However, as Patrick said, even while we have a very vibrant NOG community in South Africa, we have a number of ISPs and even corporate networks here in Durban. The local municipality always has people. The local municipality is connected to the internet exchanges here. They have people that come to the network operator group meetings, but you still get those ISPs that, even though they connect to the exchange, their routing hygiene is very bad. You know, they as Patrick says, they screw it up. So I think we have, though. I think we've really been able to create networks of people to be able to speak to each other when there are funnies happening on the internet. Then it's easy to reach out to people, and I think it builds a level of trust, which, as was mentioned earlier, when you connect to an internet exchange, you don't really trust, or should you be connecting to this internet exchange? And so there's a certain level of trust that you do have to have, and having those in-person, hopefully soon in-person meetings, brings up that level of trust between networks, so that if there are issues, you can reach out to people.
Great. Julio, you have thoughts here.
Yeah. One initiative of IX.br is to train the community. So we have courses about best practice for autonomous systems, courses about IPv6. So in the last 10 years, we have trained 1,000 of technicians in Brazil. So we know the difficult for them to operate an autonomous system, to what is BGP, how to connect to the internet exchange. So we teach them how to do it. So now we have e-learning courses because of the pandemic, but we used to have courses here in IX.br, and also we have regional trainings. So we have what we call a regional IX forum, and we do this forum together with training for the community of that region. So I believe it's very important activity that we have done during the last 10 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can say for a fact that the material that you guys produce at the Brazilian exchange is used in many countries, especially the Portuguese-speaking ones in Africa, but also in Portugal itself. So it's a huge resource. And yeah, the efforts that you're putting there are definitely noticed. So thank you for that. But sticking with you here, Julio, and this is something that I'm going to ask everybody, but starting with you, the concept of remote peering, we're hearing a lot about that, and it's interesting to get that in the context of what we're talking about here. Wouldn't just remote peering solve the issue of opening up new exchanges? Instead of opening all the exchanges that you had in Brazil, couldn't you just offer some kind of remote peering and have that done? Or is it not the same thing?
No, I believe it, just firstly we have to define what is remote peering. I believe remote peering is a network that's far away and are peering in thousands of kilometers away. So we have a lot of remote peering in Brazil, because, for example, São Paulo, we have 2,000 networks connected, and probably 1,500 or almost that are not networks from the São Paulo state. They came from everywhere in Brazil. We have a lot of telecom companies that sell transport for these networks. So remote peering using reseller ports or shared ports, it's really, really important for us. This is how we can reach such an amount of networks in Brazil. And it's interesting to know that in our root server, we have in São Paulo, 82% of the Brazilians network are announced there. So it's a big capillarity. And also that the big telecom companies, they don't participate in the IXPs, just to get a small content, small amount of content from specific content providers. So what we really reach are the small internet service providers that are spread around the country, exploring the small cities that the big companies don't have economical interest.
Fair enough. Thanks for that. Others with thoughts on remote peering?
I'll say something, but I think Patrick is also itching to talk about it. So I think it purely comes down to the economics, right? And it was mentioned earlier, an internet exchange point is about, or a successful internet exchange point is about, bringing down the costs of running one's network. And so with that, I see with many networks that while they do participate in remote peering to pick up some content, is that we in Durban have managed to get some of the CDNs to put down smaller versions of their caches, so that at least we get some content within the local exchange, and hopefully as the number of networks grows, so those that footprint will their footprint will expand. But what we've seen in Durban and what we feel is successful is that 50% of generally speaking, well over 50 to even 75% of traffic runs across the local exchange rather than going to the remote exchange 600 kilometers away.
Okay, fair enough. Other takers? Same question, Nurani.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment. I mean, so they're different things, right? So, it doesn't make sense for two local ISPs to peer through remote peering, right? That doesn't make sense. But I'm going to be a little bit controversial perhaps and say remote peering is not bad. I know that's a very controversial statement for some. But I think, again, coming back to what I think a good IXP achieves, and that is also offering that diversity of interconnection. And if you look at most, especially in most mature markets, the big networks, they don't just do one thing. They don't just do transit or just do PNIs or just do peering. They do a mix of all things, and so you don't necessarily want to put one thing against the other. It's about offering that diversity of options, right? So remote peering, again, so someone like LINX. So LINX, we have a very large IXP in London, but then we have small regional IXPs in the other parts of the UK. If we did not serve our local community, we would fail. But there's not that doesn't mean that we can also not serve an international community, which we do. And it comes down to cost, like Donald was saying, but also comes down to interconnection options or speed and latency and things like that. And we do see some remote networks come into London from far away and exchange traffic there and get benefit from that because they're actually accessing lots of other unique AS numbers at LINX. And that's a good thing, I think. In some cases they will stay like that. In some cases it's also a way of them figuring out if it makes sense for them to peer at LINX. And they can grow their peering from there, and it might actually end up with them popping in London and then peering there. And in some cases they'll stay in that arrangement. Some cases they will go away and peer somewhere else. So I don't actually think there is a conflict between the two, so to speak. Like Julio was saying, in that case, remote peering actually brings a lot of peers into their exchange points. But of course, so what you're describing, of course, does not make sense. Having an IXP that only has remote peering, or not having IXP and only do remote peering, that doesn't make sense. But it's about kind of creating that rich ecosystem.
Okay, fair enough. And since you decided to be a bit controversial, let me throw that back to you and say, doesn't it take away from, some people argue, it takes away from the uniqueness that you have of the players that are at your exchange by going through remote peering? Do you see that at all?
What do you mean that it takes away from the unique?
Well, a strong selling point for peering at an exchange is that you can meet unique people at the exchange that you probably cannot meet somewhere else, right? So with offering stuff like remote peering, you're kind of giving that away a bit, or not?
No, so, well, in most cases, IXPs, offer peering into their IXP, right? Through remote resellers. In some cases, there are IXP reseller programs. We have that with JPIX, for example, or with Namex, but it's not about trying to get the peers who are peering at your exchange to peer somewhere else. It's the opposite, right? Offering interconnection at your IXP to those who are not currently at your IXP.
Sorry, maybe I phrased the question wrong. People would not build into your exchange or your location because they can easily get that from somewhere else through your remote peer.
Right, but the value proposition is not necessarily that simple, right? And so it's about what you're trying to achieve. So again, it comes down to cost, to your, what connection speed, latency you need, but also the cost, of if you're going to pop somewhere, there's a cost outside of transport and outside of the IXP that comes into play, the transport, the equipment that you're installing, the data center, co-location, cross connects, all those things. So I don't think I have ever seen someone who is peering locally at an exchange disconnect and then go, doing that through remote peer instead, because it just doesn't work that way. But I have seen the opposite happen. So those networks who are doing remote peering into an IXP and then actually realizing that the value proposition of peering of the IXP is so high that it makes sense for me to pop there.
To actually be there presently. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thanks, Nurani. Patrick.
First of all, I don't know if it's controversial. I actually don't think it is controversial to say that remote peering is not by definition bad. If it is, sorry. What remote peering is, however, is more complex. The decision to set up peering is not as easy as some of us that run IXPs make it. It's like, oh, you're in the building, just throw a cross connect as BGP, no big deal. There's more to it than that. Performance, cost, not just equipment, but OpEx as well as CapEx. There's a lot of things that are involved in deciding to peer somewhere, and remote peering adds a great many variables that sometimes are actually not sometimes that are always not instantly apparent to those who have not done it before. So remote peering can be an excellent solution. It is a tool in the toolbox, but it's a dangerous and complicated tool. So there are ways to get help. There are companies like Megaport and Packet Fabric. Packet Fabric's way better, by the way, and not just because my wife founded it, to do these things for you. But it's still, even with the help of a company, it's still not trivial and as easy as local peering. So please do remote peering all you like, as long as you have your eyes wide open and you know exactly what you're doing and you're making a conscious decision, understanding the risks and the rewards. Also, if I could just comment on the unique AS thing. From the standpoint of an IXP operator, it's impossible for us, like if we shut down all remote peering, then we have fewer ASs, so we're not increasing our uniqueness. We're doing the opposite, right? So by allowing remote peering, and in some ways you can't really stop it, right? Then we get more ASs here. Plus, I don't see very many people going, I'm going to go to that exchange, but not this one, because all those ASs are over there. There's usually more to it than that. So we want to get as many ASs as possible. And even if we tried to stop remote peering, all that would happen is some company, whether it's Level 3 or Packet Fabric or NTT, they would just get a port and resell it, and we wouldn't know, right? Like we're not monitoring, at least none of the IXs that I know are, logging into routers and verifying, verifying configs, right? And so remote peering is a thing. Please use it if it helps you. Just please understand that there's more to it than local peering.
Yeah, no, a very good point to all of you, and especially on that. Nurani, there was a question addressed directly to you in the chat here. It says, thanks, Nurani. So what do you think the reasons that community don't encourage the IXPs that are run by incumbent operators in some countries? And that specifically has your name on it.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment, but I'm sure others can speak to it as well. So again, it comes down to that trust because what you want of an IXP is for that to create this sort of rich ecosystem. So you don't want to have one dominant player that then, there are plenty of examples of the incumbent creating an IXP, but in fact it's not an IXP, it's just a switch at their data center where they control, everything. So I think, in many cases there's some suspicion against the large telco, the motivations of a large telco supporting an IXP. But I think, again, it comes down to looking at how that IXP is run. Just because you're the large telco does not mean that you're evil and all your intentions are bad, of course. But then, the proof is in the pudding, right? So how do you run that IXP? Is it open? Is it neutral? Is it maybe at a carrier neutral data center? Is it, does it have an open joining policy? Does it have, some sort of forum where it listens to its participants? If it has those things, then, then I think it can be a good IXP. And again, it will show if it will be a good IXP or not. If it's not, and if it's just a tool for the incumbent, then, the ISPs will disconnect from it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think that's maybe where the hesitation comes from. But I'm happy for others to comment, of course.
Yeah, if others have comments, but two comments to that as well. I think one of the things that factor in as well is like pricing, like the last mile pricing that they would charge on getting interconnected to some of the services that are there. I've seen that play out several times. But I've also seen, like in the case of Russia, for example, MSKIX was operating as an exchange before it was bought by Rustelecom, the incumbent there. It's been bought out for years and it's still operating as one of the biggest exchanges in the country, even though it's owned by Rustelecom there. So we have seen examples of this working. But as you said, as long as the neutrality is there and the separation in how the two are run, I think that's a key factor here. Others with thought on this question, or do I move to others? Okay, nobody's rushing to the mic. So I wanted to ask also like a free-for-all question here, and tying this back to the franchise versus homegrown concept here. What we've seen in several African countries, but also neighboring countries as well, is usually when they start thinking of a second exchange, they usually go with more of the franchise model. And the rationale is usually like the franchise one is a little bit more, established. They have the connections, they can bring in the bigger players, and that can really give like a big boost for the new exchange. Do you see that as a factor? We've heard Donald's story about the very homegrown perspectives there. So just trying to play off that homegrown versus franchise. And I know some of this was touched on, but throwing it in for debate again. So thoughts? Would getting a franchise exchange help or not? Launching a new exchange?
I'll answer that one.
Donald?
No one else is running up. No, I don't think anyone should be, and I'm talking more about Africa than anywhere else, but I don't see any reason for someone to be buying a box from another continent where the way their models, where their businesses work is very, very different to Africa. Africa, if I can give an example, in South Africa, there was an author that termed it coined a term cosyonomics. Now, what that really means is it's a type of economics where instead of buying things in bulk, it's just bought one piece at a time. So someone doesn't buy a bag of apples. When they're hungry and they're walking to work, they buy a single apple from a vendor. When they want to buy a cigarette, they don't buy a carton of cigarettes because it's cheaper. They will buy a single cigarette, consume it right there and then they move on with their day. So how does it work that that type of economy is going to fit into an exchange that comes from Europe and the way that, or from the US and the way that they operate in their markets? So that's my view on it, and I feel that we should be focusing, and I'm talking specifically around Africa, around the needs and the way that we do things, and not rely on other people to say this is how it should be run. Don't get me wrong, as I said earlier, the great thing about the community is that there is a big community and there are people that are willing to help. And I think when it comes to certain things, I think the help should be asked for. But when it comes to how you run an internet exchange point, I don't think it's really necessary to go and expect an outside party to come and operate something that you know how the market operates.
Question to you, again being a bit controversial, yeah, Patrick, but do you think it would add a little bit of neutrality to the equation by bringing in a foreign player, not necessarily dragged by some of the other local issues that, for example, are at the original exchange, or not? Donald?
I think I'm not sure if you're referring to certain exchanges that are built due to regulation and things like that, because that's also a different scenario altogether. I just think that each market has is unique, just like everybody else, right? But so I don't think that the way that somebody builds an internet exchange point is always the same copy and paste. And sure, if an internet exchange point isn't working, maybe having to then franchise that might work. And the connections with the content providers and things like that, I think, are definitely a bonus. However, it was only 3 or 4 years ago that I joined the first AFPIF, and I went out there myself and I stalked Google and Facebook and Netflix and all the content providers and hounded them and said, there's this place in South Africa called Durban. And I think eventually Facebook got tired of me and eventually just put down a cache just to keep me quiet, So, but they came and they connected a cache to the local exchange points. So I think it's important for us to take control of our own exchange points, our own local communities, because we understand them and we should be supporting them as a and local could be anything from city to province or state to country.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Donald. Patrick, you wanted to comment?
I want to both agree and disagree slightly. So pardon me if this is sounds conflicted, but it's not. I completely agree that the local people are better at understanding. This is not just in Africa, this is everywhere, whether it's the United States, South America, Asia, etc. The local people are going to know how the local economy, the local network, the local community works better than somebody from far away. However, having run multiple volunteer, quote unquote, internet exchanges, I can tell you that sometimes, even if there is a large community, even if people say they're willing to help, even if people are willing to help, sometimes you're just missing a vital part, or not everybody's available, or it can just be difficult. So if the choice is setting up a local one that may not get done, or may be delayed by literally years because of resource issues or internal back and forth, versus franchise, I would say it's better to get somebody to start something. Again, as I said before, the hardest part is getting those cables plugged in the first BGP session set up. After that, things are not easy, but they get easier. So if you have the right people who are willing to do this, then please set it up locally. There's plenty of people in your country and probably out of your country that are willing to give advice and help, donate things, etc. But if you don't, and there's an opportunity to get an internet exchange going by going the franchise route, I would say you would do yourself a disservice by not at least considering it.
Fair point. Yeah, Nurani, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with what Patrick was saying. I think, but I don't think there's a conflict there. So I think, you know, any IXP needs to have some local connection. You know, if you don't have that, it's not going to work. You need to know the local players. You need to speak the local language in some cases. If you want to be successful, you might need to speak to the local regulators. And you need to understand the infrastructure, what data centers there are, who the people at the different local networks are. But there is a big challenge in starting a new IXP, and actually, you know, Donald was clearly very successful in you know, wearing down the resistance from the big content providers, but that's a lot of work as well. So, and you can use the term franchise IXP, or you can use, you know, experienced IXPs. I think there is something to be said for economy of scale, and especially if you build a lot of automation into your IXP, then doing a second or third IXP and doing it well and securely and all that is not as hard. There might also be, so for example, when I worked for the Swedish IXP, there was a little bit of economy of scale also in that, you know, even in terms of hardware that could be used, you know, as one IXP grew, that some of that hardware could be reused, but also then in terms of automation and managing the IXPs. And then also having access to all those, you know, international players is another one. So LINX gets approached quite a lot about building IXPs in other places. And we're happy to partner with local IXPs to build IXPs there. If there's a case for it, if we think we can do good in that market, but we will always partner with someone, because I don't think that it would make sense for LINX to just parachute in a solution somewhere and say, okay, good luck, off you go. So partnering with a local player, I think is key. A lot of people who approach LINX think that, okay, you've got, you know, close to 1,000 members. Can you bring all those 1,000 members to whatever, to Burundi or to Ouagadougou, or, you know, and of course that doesn't work. It doesn't work like that, because it's about, you know, what networks can get benefit from peering in that location. But of course, I also understand that it helps that LINX, we know these people personally and we can more easily have these conversations. So I think you need both. you need, you know, you need the local connections, and then you need the experience, and that's sometimes difficult to marry. So if you've got a local champion, go for it. You know, I think that's great. If you've got someone who's experienced, who's offering to build an IXP, go for that. You know, like Patrick said, getting started is the hardest. So yeah, it's about finding that mix.
Yeah, makes sense. And to borrow a word that I learned from you in this thing, there's no automagical solution for this. So yeah, no, I get it, and it's a very fair point that you're bringing here. We're almost out of time, but I regret having this to be my last question, but it had to be asked because in sometimes an exchange doesn't really work out. Right. So we talked about, you know, how, yes, putting in the effort and doing the education and doing all this stuff is important, but there's also an element of when do you call quits, right? And that's something that people don't really discuss on these panels, but I also am interested to hear from you. When do you think you could say enough is enough, or is there never a point? And starting from you, Nurani, again, if you don't mind, and going through the rest of the panelists, do you have thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's simple. You don't decide. It's your customers who decide.
Yeah, fair enough. Sweet and simple. Patrick.
I mostly agree with Nurani. Unfortunately, if there are costs associated with the exchange, then obviously, even if you've got some customers that want to continue, but they don't cover the costs, then the decision is made for you. But like I said earlier, even if you have three participants and they're happy to talk to each other, and you know, either the costs are covered or everything's donated, then the answer is never. Whereas if the costs are not covered, or, and by the way, by costs I mean not just hard dollar costs, but also OpEx, you know, people time, then that decision is made for you.
Fair enough. Dawn?
Am I going to go first?
Yeah, please, Dawn. Sorry.
It's exactly the same. Yeah, if it doesn't make economical sense, if it's financially it's losing money, that's basically the time that it needs to close down. I mean, it's, you know, as much as these things are don't appear to be businesses, everything is driven by money, right? So, you know, if it's not covering its costs, then it's time to close, you know, and if there's no, maybe then it's time to call in a franchise model, which could then could then turn it on its head and make it successful.
Well, I mean, also let me also clarify why I'm asking the question, because we have seen in Africa, but also in other countries, where, you know, there's a decision made to build an exchange somewhere, right? And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. And we've seen countries that say, okay, we have these like 5-6 different locations that we want exchanges in, and maybe 2 of them succeed while the others don't really go anywhere. So that's kind of where the question was coming from. Julio, you have thoughts on this?
Yes, for us, as I said before, we don't have the economic concern. So for us, creating an IXP is an investment, and sometimes it took 5-10 years for an IXP to grow to be really effective for all the networks that are involved. So if you can keep it running and waiting it to grow, I think it's the right option. We can do it, but I know that if you have a commercial operation, you have to take care of that.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Thanks for that. We have a poll question, so if we can do the final poll here, and then we wrap up. So yes, here's a question to the audience, based on what you heard, but also based on your experience. What do you think are the most important criteria when selecting a new IXP location? And we're very curious to get your thoughts here. While people are answering, maybe I can ask the panelists for like their final thoughts here. So Julio, starting from your side again, final thoughts.
Okay. For us to choose a new location, normally we make a survey trying to identify cities that have the lack of interconnectivity, that have presence of internet service providers, presence of operators, something that justify the presence of an internet exchange point. And sometimes it's difficult to just to take a look at only the numbers. Sometimes we have to deal with some kind of geographic investment. So we have to invest in regions that have a poor telecommunication infrastructure, but it maybe it will help to this region to grow. So we have to choose between these two options.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Don?
I don't really have anything else to add. I think it was mentioned that in order to start an exchange, you need a champion. It may be a company, it may be an individual or a couple of individuals. And I think those champions need to drive, the building the community. And it is difficult to get community participation and people to come together, but to try gather up the people around you to participate in, the network operator groups, get-togethers, so that you can build the community in general. And I think having those people to drive, the exchange point to then make it viable, so that you don't have to close any exchange points, and maybe you have to just change the way you do it. Maybe the way that you're doing it now isn't working. So that's
Great, thanks for that, Don. Can we get the results of the poll? Maybe they can help inspire Nurani and Patrick with some thoughts. So yes, 39% talked about latency and national backbone backhauling. 39% as well, we're talking about the presence of data centers and content providers in the new market, whereas everything else is, 16% was number of eyeballs in the new location, where 3% each were for submarine, landing stations and for competition. Patrick, thoughts on these or on anything else?
So the thoughts on the question are, let's take number of eyeballs. That's obviously content providers, right? Because other eyeball providers don't matter. So there's a little bit of skew in the questions, but it's useful to have the answers. Just, it's important when you look at a poll to understand the underlying dynamics. As far as the panel in general, I would just like to close with the thing that I've said a couple of times before. Start an IXP, get it going, talk to 2 other providers, whether enterprise, although be careful with that, or content or ISPs, and find out if you're all in the same location and see if you can start it quick and cheap. Just get it going. It'll help your local community. And this is true for small and large cities. It's not that hard. There's plenty of, it's not trivial, but it's not that hard. And there's plenty of help out on the internet if you need it. So the first step's always the hardest. I hope that we've motivated or inspired somebody or several of you to start your own thing going now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm seeing some of the comments coming in. People are really agreeing with all the points. They're saying that they're quite different, but they all are valid in their own sense. Nurani, thoughts?
Yes, certainly. And then when it comes to the poll, of course, all those factors matter, and it's not as easy, we would all like to have a rating system, right? To say, okay, if you've got X amount of this and X amount of that, then the conditions are right. But of course, you have to look at all those factors. I would say first of all, start small. If you want to build an IXP, start small. Get a community going, and that means you have to speak to your friends and you need to speak to your competitors as well. So that's first thing. And think about scaling, but don't try to build the largest IXP in the world to start with. Those things will come if you do things right. Another thing I'd like to say is to reach out to existing players, be it franchise IXPs or some of the other existing IXPs. In some cases, it might make sense for you to partner with an existing IXP who has all the experience. If they can sort of bootstrap you, then I think that's a great thing. But the other thing is, even just in terms of knowledge sharing, when I started out in the industry, I was amazed by how generous many of the existing players were in sharing their knowledge. And taking my LINX hat off and putting on my IX hat, I'd also like to say that speak to your IXP association, APNIC, or come to the IX and learn from those who've built before. There's a lot of knowledge out there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think cost matters. I think there's a tendency to think that free is the best model, but free is not sustainable. You want to be able to cover your costs. You don't have to make money off the IXP. If you're trying to make a lot of money off your IXP, you're not doing it right. But cost matters, so think about that. The other thing is you don't need to solve all the problems in the market. The IXP is not the solution to everything. There are a lot of pieces of the puzzles that need to come together, but the IXP can be a key part of that. Create a focal point for your community. Organize, it can be simple online or physical meetings where I often find that food and drink is this catalyst for other good things. So, invite your local community and get some food and drink together and start the conversation. And one thing that I'd like to say is get your local regulator to those food and drink sessions as well, because the regulator can be the one that actually enables the IXP or that stops it. So getting them to understand what benefit the IXP has or brings is key as well. And then, be active out there. Don't just build something, in your data center and then go back. Actually start speaking to people and get people to champion your IXP, get ambassadors for your IXP, and if your members of the IXP, if they do all the promotion for you, then you're doing a good thing.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. They're really, really good comments. And to pick on to that, I like get your regulator into these things. I think that's a really good advice, especially in Africa. It's a make or break kind of a thing. So that's a really good one. The second one was it's all about the socials, right? And I really like that because we do have a social coming up here, and I hope you guys stick around for that. I will be handing over for Mitch for that, but before I do so, I'd like to thank the panelists very much for all the insights that they provided us. I think they've been very, very insightful, and people are saying so as well. There's also, I'd like to thank AFIX and ISOC for organizing these sessions. And a big thanks to the sponsors, Facebook, NAP Africa, Microsoft, VAX Center, and for the simultaneous interpretation, Flexoptix. Mitch, handing over to you.
Thank you, Hisham, and thank you again to the panelists. That was a really interesting conversation. So we'll go on to the next part, which is the virtual peering personals. And so up first will be, I think that's Amra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Michuki, and thank you to the panelists for the great insights. Greetings from Amsterdam, from the Netherlands. As AM6, we are one of the leading internet exchanges in the world. Our leading platform is in Amsterdam, Here we have almost 900 connected networks with a peak traffic of more than 10 terabit per second traffic. We have 14 POPs in Amsterdam to connect to us directly. Apart from this, we have more than 250 enabled locations to connect to AM6 remotely in Europe, in Central and Western Europe. Apart from Amsterdam, we have other internet exchanges all around the world. One in Hong Kong, another one in the US, in Chicago and in Bay Area, in India, in Caribbean, and in Bahrain, which is powered by AM6 service. Later this year, we will have at least 2 new internet exchanges, one in Uzbekistan and another one in Egypt, in Cairo. Both will be powered by AM6 platforms. You can see our sales team on the photos, Ono, Noha, and myself. Please reach out to us via sales@am6.net if you have any inquiries or if you have any questions about peering or connecting to AM6. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Mark. Next up is Epsilon. Mark.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Daly from Epsilon. We're a global connectivity provider that's attempting to make the need for connecting applications and data in the cloud and around the world really simple through our SDN platform we call Infini. Using Infini, you can order, activate, and manage services from layer 2 and layer 3 connectivity to data centers, clouds, and internet exchanges, as well as we do last mile, SIP trunking, and inbound services. Now, companies can choose to use us to remotely peer, as we've been talking about today, to internet exchanges, or can simply choose to peer with us directly on internet exchanges ourselves. You can peer with us on NAP Africa, for instance, in South Africa. Although listed as selective, we're pretty open when it comes to peering and offering the ability to connect both with us and our customer base via 44356. And if you're interested, feel free to email us at the addresses shown on screen. There's lots of marks in our company. I'm the bottom one. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Next is Globe Telecom, Achi.
Yeah, hi, Achi here from Globe Telecom. We are an ISP in the Philippines. Our main AS number is 4775. Traffic volume is around 3 tera, and we have an open peering policy. In terms of locations, we are spread across in Asia, US, and Europe. And answering the discussion earlier, so we're also locally connected in country as well, local peering, and extended to Japan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, as well as East and West Coast US. We also do remote peering, and this is strategic because we have European content requirement by our customers. For the complete details, you can check out the peering DB, that's AS4775. And then you can contact me, Achi@Chensa, to my email or peering@globe.com.th for peering interconnection requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Achi. And last but not least is LINX, AS5459. We have Inga.
Good afternoon, it's Inga here from a very rainy London. Good to speak to you all, and thank you very much for a great presentation today. We have 989 members, including in 84 countries. Sorry, wrong way around, 989 member ASNs with 885 members in 84 countries. We recently passed 6 terabits of traffic. This does not include traffic passed over our private interconnect service. You can connect with us either directly or remotely via one of our partners. Please feel free to contact me at inga@linx.net or sales@linx.net. If I'm not able to help you, one of my colleagues will be. Great to see you all, and hopefully I'll see you in person very soon.
Thank you very much, Inga. And that brings us to an end to our virtual peering personals. Once again, we normally send these invites to those people who have registered. So register early for you to get the invite, or rather at least the instructions on how to participate in the virtual peering personals. And we look forward to having you present at the next event. We haven't concluded on the titles for the next event, but we shall be making the announcements on the dates and the title of the panel in the coming days. So please look out for that. Next up, as we come to a conclusion, so first I'd like to thank our live stream attendees who will be basically not able to join us unless they'd like to join us for the virtual social. We have a couple of minutes for us to be able to do the virtual social. And I would like to take a minute to just walk you through the virtual social. If you could just bear with me for a second. Let's see if I can share my